Welcome to today's Explainer, where we're diving into the source material behind the invisible empire of private equity. We're going to explore a really fascinating paradox: why profitable, beloved brands suddenly fall apart, without obvious reasons like bad products or poor leadership. What if I told you that some of your favorite brands weren't destroyed by bad products, bad employees, or bad luck? What if many of them were making money right before they started falling apart? It sounds impossible, because when a company begins to fail, we usually look for obvious reasons: a changing market, new competition, poor leadership. But behind some of America's most shocking corporate collapses, investigators kept finding the same fingerprints.
Not one person,
Not one company.
an entire industry. An industry so unbelievably powerful that it controls trillions of dollars, owns pieces of our everyday lives, and yet it operates mostly outside of public attention. Most people have never even heard its name, but it's probably influenced the restaurant you eat at, the apartment you rent, the hospital you visit, and even the products sitting in your home right now. The question isn't whether you've encountered it. The question is how many times. And honestly, once you see the pattern, it's almost impossible to unsee. Because this isn't just a story about business. It's a story about how a completely invisible financial machine learned to buy entire companies, pull the wealth right out of them, and sometimes leave behind something very different from what customers originally loved.
Section 1. Companies as financial assets. The financial chessboard.
To understand how this all happened, we need to look at why people build companies in the first place. For decades, the answer was pretty straightforward. An entrepreneur creates something useful, customers buy it, the company grows, employees build careers, communities benefit, and investors earn their returns. It wasn't a perfect system, but it was designed around creating value over time. Then a new model appeared that looked at companies entirely differently. Not as products, not as communities, not even as brands, but as assets. Literally just pieces on a giant financial chessboard. And that change in perspective, it transformed American business forever. Imagine walking into a beautiful, historic old house. You admire the architecture, the history, the craftsmanship. Most of us just see a home, right? Well, a financial engineer sees something else entirely. They see the land value, the resale potential, the debt capacity, the hidden cash. Now imagine applying that exact same mindset to thousands of companies across the country. That's exactly where our story begins.
Section 2. The burden of debt. A financial shortcut.
By the late 20th century, a new class of investors realized something incredibly powerful. Buying a successful company could actually be more profitable than building one from scratch. But there was a catch. Successful companies were expensive. And that's when they discovered a financial shortcut that changed the game completely. Instead of paying the full price themselves, they could just borrow most of the money. And we're talking lots of money. More money than most of us can even wrap our heads around. Suddenly, these massive billion-dollar acquisitions became possible. But here comes the really strange part. That debt? It often didn't stay with the buyers. It got transferred directly to the company that had just been purchased. Think about that for a second. A business spends decades building up a healthy balance sheet. Then, literally overnight, it wakes up carrying enormous financial obligations it never asked for. And from that moment forward, everything changes. The company is no longer focused primarily on growth. It's focused entirely on survival. Making those monthly payments becomes the top priority. Debt becomes this constant clock ticking in the background. And every single decision starts revolving around one desperate question: how do we generate more cash fast?
Section 3. The cycle of cuts. Beneath the surface.
At first, customers rarely even notice. The logo remains exactly the same. The stores remain open. The ads keep running. Everything appears totally normal. But beneath the surface, a transformation is already underway. Then, the first cuts arrive. A few positions disappear, a few departments shrink, routine maintenance projects get delayed. Nothing super dramatic, right? Nothing that's going to make the evening news, just small changes. Small enough that nobody panics, yet large enough to slightly improve the numbers. And those numbers absolutely matter, because the financial machine is now watching closely. Every quarter, every month, every single week, demanding better results. So the company starts looking for more places to save a buck. Cheaper suppliers, smaller teams, reduced services, lower operating costs. Each decision might seem perfectly reasonable on its own, but together, they begin fundamentally changing the company itself. Customers don't notice it immediately. It's a gradual thing. You start to notice a slightly longer wait time, a slightly lower quality product, an employee who just seems exhausted, a service that feels way less personal than it used to. Something feels different, but nobody can quite put their finger on why. Then, another curious thing happens. Prices start rising, and sometimes they rise significantly. Customers naturally assume inflation is the culprit, and, sometimes it is. But occasionally, there is another force entirely at work, because raising prices is one of the absolute fastest ways to improve financial performance, especially when a company is under immense pressure to produce cash. So now the customer is paying more, receiving less, and wondering what on earth happened to the brand they once completely trusted.
Section 4. Stripping assets for cash.
But guys, the story gets even stranger. Because for some of these companies, simple cost cutting just isn't enough. They need more money. And that is when valuable, long-held assets come into focus. Office buildings, warehouses, retail locations, properties that took decades to accumulate, assets that can be sold off immediately. Now, from a spreadsheet perspective, this looks absolutely brilliant. You sell the property, collect a massive pile of cash, and instantly improve your short-term finances. Problem solved, right? Well, except there's a pretty devastating catch. The company still actually needs those buildings to operate. So after selling them, it often just rents them back from the new owner. What was once owned outright becomes leased. A permanent asset transforms into a permanent expense. The company gets temporary relief, sure, but it completely sacrifices its long-term stability. It's literally like selling your own house to pay today's bills and then paying rent just so you can keep sleeping in your own bedroom. The cash arrives instantly, the consequences arrive slowly, and slow consequences are really easy to ignore, at least at first.
Section 5. The growing invisible empire, spreading influence.
Meanwhile, the financial firms orchestrating these deals just keep expanding. Their influence is spreading across almost every industry you can think of: restaurants, retail, healthcare, housing, childcare, technology, manufacturing. One single acquisition becomes 10. 10 becomes 100. Pretty soon, companies that appear totally unrelated are actually connected behind the scenes by the exact same ownership groups. They have different logos, different brands, different products, but they are all running the exact same financial strategy.
And that's exactly when critics began asking a rather uncomfortable question. If this financial model creates so much value, why do so many beloved brands seem so much weaker afterward? Well, the answer isn't completely black and white, because, to be fair, not every acquisition fails. Some companies do improve, some become much more efficient, and some genuinely thrive. But when failures do happen, the pattern often looks incredibly familiar. Heavy debt, aggressive cost reductions, asset sales, a focus on short-term gains leading to immense long-term pressure. And eventually, something breaks. Employees are usually the first to feel it. Workloads increase, teams shrink, stress levels go through the roof. Then, communities feel it. Stores close down, local services disappear, and the local economy takes a hit. And finally, the customers feel it. The brand they once loved just doesn't feel the same anymore. The quality drops, the overall experience changes, the magic just vanishes. And they start asking a question that nobody seems able to answer. Why does everything feel worse lately?
Yet perhaps the most surprising part of this entire story is that the system just keeps growing, year after year, decade after decade. Why? Because from an investor's perspective, the incentives are incredibly powerful. Pension funds want returns, universities want returns, massive institutions want returns, and these financial firms promise to deliver them. We are talking about trillions, yes, with a T, trillions of dollars flowing into this system. More capital creates more acquisitions create more influence, and more influence creates even more opportunities. It's a cycle that feeds entirely on itself. Until one day you look around and realize something truly remarkable. So many parts of modern life are connected by ownership structures that most people will never even see.
And honestly, that is the real mystery here. Not that private equity exists, not that businesses change over time, not even that some companies inevitably fail. The real mystery is how invisible these massive forces remain, despite affecting millions of people every single day. Because most customers only ever see the final result. They see a higher bill, a closed store, a weaker product, a disappearing brand. What they don't see are the boardrooms, the massive debt agreements, the complex financial engineering. They don't see the decisions that were made years earlier. Yet those hidden decisions are often exactly what shape the world we experience today.
And maybe that's the lesson. The biggest changes in our lives don't always arrive with headlines. Sometimes they arrive quietly, one acquisition at a time, one cost cut at a time, one familiar brand at a time, until suddenly the world looks different, and only then do we start asking how it happened. By that point, the invisible empire has already moved on to its next target. So look closely at the places you shop, eat, and live. Is your favorite brand already on borrowed time,